No, man, but you got to keep going. What am I going to do, quit? That's not an option. You got to keep on keeping on. Life's a garden, dig it? You make it work for you. You never give up, man. That's my philosophy.
Hey, gardeners. I hope you're all having a great week. Everything's growing great in your garden. I'm out here checking out all the bees going crazy, harvesting the pollen from our sunflowers here. Saw one flying earlier that had so much pollen on it, it was falling off of it while it was flying like pixie dust. But that's what we're talking about this week. We've got some really great beekeepers this weekend to talk all about beekeeping. So, all right, let's get growing. All right. Welcome all my plant enthusiasts and my garden enthusiasts and passionate plant people. Welcome to Let's Get Growing, your weekly gardening live stream right here on the Urban Gardener channel. I'm Enoch. I'm your host today. We've got a really great show for you today. We're talking this weekend all about bees and beekeeping. We've got some great guests for you here today. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by Kamon Reynolds from Tennessee's Bees. And here in just a few minutes on the show as well, too, we'll be talking with Jonathan Hargus, the Hive Doctor as well, too, here. So definitely stay tuned for these great guests today. And if you are here joining with us right now, definitely hit that thumbs up button, click the like button, hit the subscribe button, as well as the bell notification so you can be notified of all of those upcoming videos and live streams here on the Urban Gardener channel, and definitely share with all of your friends for sure. And also, too, right here at the top of the show, we love to give a big, huge shout out to all of you who are watching on our replay. Thank you so much for taking your time to join with us here on the Let's Get Growing show. And as always, we love to hear from you. So definitely get down into that comment section below. Let us know you're here. Let us know what you think of the show, any comments, questions, or anything like that. Definitely. And if you are here right now with us live as well, too, definitely jump into the chat here and ask any questions, leave any comments, and we just might feature those on the show as well, too. And yeah, everybody, we've got a really great weekend in store for you here, all about beekeeping. But I also want to let you know, too, that this last weekend, or this last actually, let's start with last Wednesday, because last weekend we didn't do our Saturday show. We had to move it up because I was traveling. I was down visiting Southern California for the National Heirloom Exposition. And so we moved our Saturday show to a special edition of the Let's Get Growing show on Wednesday evening. And we did a nice review and talk and bunch of interviews from lots of great gardeners who've been here on the show with us that I got to meet up with down at the National Heirloom Exposition. So go back and check that out. What would be our Wednesday show. And then also we were here though last Sunday, because last Sunday was our monthly gardening book club. And this last month's gardening book club was All the President's Gardens by Marta McDowell. Marta joined with us to talk about this really great book of hers, taking us through the history of gardens in not just the White House itself, too. This is what was really great about this book, is it was just really kind of a great historical kind of travel through from the beginning of the country through the building of Washington, D.C., and then all of these other aspects of how these gardens really came to be in some of these great parts of our national heritage there, too. So that was a really great interview. You're going to want to check that out. And we also announced next month's book club, which is How to Become a Gardener by Ashley Thomas. Ashley's book is really great. We've talked about it before. She's been a guest on the show already a couple of times so far, and just really great to have her back and to be able to actually feature her book and just dig into it this month. So definitely join with us for, again, the third Sunday of the month, which will be October 20th. for that interview with Ashley Thomas. It's going to be really, really great too. So you'll definitely want to check that out as well. And yeah, so we've got lots of things growing on here in the Let's Get Growing show. Lots and lots of things going on in the garden as well too. As you saw at the beginning there, the bees are going crazy over all of our sunflowers, and we're harvesting tons of different things from the garden and kind of starting to transition towards what is our fall garden and fall growing and all of that as well too. So we're, I've got actually tons of like lettuce and all that sort of stuff that's actually starting to come up as the weather's starting to cool down a little bit. So that's really great what's going on too. But this weekend we're talking more so than gardening. We're talking about bees, those important parts of our gardens to keep everything pollinated and growing, so we can have all of that great stuff growing out of our garden. And beekeeping is really kind of something that's I haven't been around much. I haven't been around bees and much more than seeing them fly around our garden, like I said, and pollinating all of these great flowers throughout our garden to make sure that we've got these great crops that we can harvest. But being around them in such large groups, I've never done that before. And so I reached out for tomorrow's show. We're going to have a nice video clip from a visit I just did yesterday, in fact, at our Southern Oregon Bee Association here in Southern Oregon. And Leslie from Southern Oregon Bee Association was kind enough to take me out there and brought me a bee suit too, because I don't even have my own bee suit. So I got to don a bee suit and get out there and check out some of these beehives that they have out there at the Southern Oregon Bee Association. And I'm telling you what, it was really so fascinating. And one of the things I was explaining to her and others as well too, I was one of those kids that, very early on in my life, I got stung by a bee. And then from that point on, I was just terrified, terrified of anything that possibly had a stinger, could bite, that was flying around, even some that couldn't, that I swore in my own mind that they probably could. I was the one kid running like crazy and freaking out about any of those sort of things flying around me. But it was because of gardening and getting into gardening many years ago that those sort of thoughts and those sort of things started changing as I started learning more about bees and how important they are to our gardens, and all of those other crazy flying things too, as well, with stingers and can bite you and do all of that as well too. They all play a very important role in our food web and what we're doing in growing our own gardens, and especially for us who are growing food gardens. So, it became almost a necessity for me to be able to, figure out what's our relationship? What are we both doing here? I've got my job to do in the garden in order to get a great garden, to be able to harvest all of this great food that we're able to do. And then the bees and the other pollinators as well do as well as, some of the other bugs and things that are going on in our gardens. So I learned a lot more about integrated pest management and all of that for the garden. And along with that comes to really understanding how important bees are to what we're doing in our gardens. So one of the things that I've talked about before on the show with others who've talked about, when we've gotten on the subject of talking either about bees or other sorts of pollinators and bugs and pests and all that sort of stuff, is that there are these ones like myself. I've had to overcome a certain level of fear that I had of these these important insects in our gardens. And so one of the things that I had to do is, and one of the things I kind of tell newer gardeners too, especially who are out there, just getting started with gardening, because I see it a lot actually in groups and places of that where we get to talk to a lot of beginning gardeners, is that's one of the things that is a big deterrent for them, is all of the pests, all of the bugs, and all of the things that are in their gardens that they are just getting started, like myself. When you get started, you got to start getting used to those sort of things, because some some of them are just really important to what we're doing when we're growing. So I've always kind of, from what I learned, have now kind of taught other newer gardeners, is that what you got to do is you got to turn fear into fascination. So instead of being fearful of these things, what we got to do is kind of be fascinated. Take a step back instead of running, and then just kind of, instead of running, and just kind of take a look and observe and watch and see what these different bugs, bees, wasps, spiders, no matter what it is that's going on in our garden, just kind of watch and see what they're doing. And then also kind of dig in and learn a little bit more about what their purpose is. And then if their purpose isn't good, like a lot of pests, this is one of the bigger deterrents as well too, is, how pests can just ravage our gardens and leave us with some really awful looking plants at times. We want to also be able to figure out what we can do to take care of those. And being such a real kind of organic gardener myself, I tend to literally try to stay away from anything that's chemical, even some organic solutions and things like that we mix up and things like that. I still try to avoid, because what I find is that as I've learned more about integrated pest management, these are things that we can really start to do by helping other bugs get into our garden to be able to help take care of some of those issues. But again, we're talking about bees and beekeeping this weekend, and I've got so many questions for our upcoming guests here in just a few minutes as well too. And again, too, just being such a beginner, and I hope all of you really enjoy our conversation as well too. Let's jump in and see who we got joining with us. I already see everybody's got a good conversation going on in the chat right now. So let's see here. We got to definitely, right at the top of the show, definitely say hello to our facilitator, Jay Dixon from Ontario, Canada. Thank you so much, Jay, for jumping in and joining with us here today, and being and helping us along with the conversation. So definitely be sure to keep an eye out in the chat there, as Jay usually drops us some really great information and links to different things that we're talking about through the live stream. So definitely be watching out for that as well too. We got Rick joining us all the way from the future in Australia right now. Nice and bright and early morning for Rick joining with us here. So thanks having Rick says we have to behave today. Yeah, that's really great. I love it, Rick. Thank you so much. And here we are. I love the international aspect of our show. This is just one of the great things about it. So we definitely got to welcome Rob's Allotment Gardening joining us from the UK. Thank you, Rob, for joining with us here too. And then also, we might have a real nice international audience there too, but I also got our other moderator, Adam Burley, who's just from right up the road in Central Point, Oregon from me. So great to see you, Adam. Thanks for joining with us today. Teach Treats, how are you doing? How are you doing today? We got, let's see, Sam joining with us. Be there. Right on. Thanks, Sam. Great to see you here. Let's see, don't want to miss anybody else here. Gingerfoot Garden, awesome. Great to see you. Awesome to have you here with us today. And make sure get through here. I see everybody's already getting a good conversation started. So like I said, if you are here and you're joining with us here and you haven't jumped in already, definitely jump in there and let us know you're here. Let us know what you got growing on. Join the conversation along with all of us here. We got the English Ladies Kitchen Garden. Thank you so much for jumping in and joining with us as well too. Right on. Great, everybody. It's good to see you. All right. Well, let's get moving on today. We've got, like I said, a great show. I'm really excited about talking to these guests here. Because I've got so much I want to know about bees. And after seeing those beehives yesterday, like I was talking about, man, I'm even more excited about the possibility of maybe even getting started myself. But I'll say one thing, and this is why we've got all these great guests here this weekend too, is that there is so much to learn about beekeeping and proper beekeeping and all of that sort of stuff. And I really got a good lesson on that yesterday. So, all right, everybody, we'll be right back here in just a minute, and we'll be joined with Jonathan Hargus, the Hive Doctor. Let's Get Growing is sponsored by IV Organic.
Hi, my name is Charles Malky, biologist and plant expert with Hive Organics, where we grow cool plants and author Saving the World with the Home Garden. Hive Organic 3-in-1 Plant Guard has 7 natural oils that protect your plants, not just from the summer heat as well as winter cold, but also protects your plants from damaging insects and rodents. The oils in the product include castor, cinnamon, clove, garlic, peppermint, rosemary, and spearmint. These oils are natural insect and rodent repellent oils, which are encapsulated by the base powder, offering your plants months of protection at a time. 1 application per year will suffice for protection against damaging summer sunburn and winter sun scald, but if the target is pests, application as much as 2 to 3 times a year may be necessary.
Hi everyone, this is Sarah from Sarah's Seed Shop, here with another trivia question. When collecting pollen, about how much of its own body weight can the average honeybee carry? A, 25%, B, 30%, C, 35%, or D, 40%? We'll be back with the answer a little later in the show.
All right, all right. Do you all have an idea on Sarah's trivia question this week? What a great question, too. And as I mentioned as well, right in the opening there, as I was showing some clips of some bees that were flying all around all of our sunflowers. We've got, I clipped some of the sunflowers to give to one of the neighbors the day before yesterday, and so she was holding them, and as she was holding them and we were talking about the different things in the garden and all of that, a bee flew up to go and check out one of the sunflowers, and it was one of the most amazing things I've seen. And I tried to get the camera out as fast as I could to see if maybe I could try to capture it at all, but I don't know if I was really able to do that or not. But I'll have to check. I have to double check this footage that I got. But this bee was flying and hovering around it, and it was carrying so much pollen on it that it was literally falling off the bee as it was flying around. It was just falling off, sort of like pixie dust and all of that. I thought it was one of just the coolest things that I've seen. And I've never seen, I've seen bees flying around all the time, but I've never seen one where it's actually just falling from them. So that's just really, really amazing. So, all right, everybody, let's get moving along here today on the show. We got our first segment, and let's see who we're following today.
Are you following me? Are you following me, dude?
All right, all right. Today we are following Jonathan Hargus, the Hive Doctor, right? I got that right, didn't I? Hive Doctor. How you doing, Jonathan?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. Having a great weekend.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for taking your time and joining with us here today for our beekeeping show. And it's really awesome to have you here today.
Same here. I appreciate the invitation.
Awesome, awesome. Well, let's start digging in right away. First of all, we needed to know just a little bit more about Jonathan Hargus. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with beekeeping.
So it actually started really fortunate, not like most beekeepers who struggle. It's got such a huge learning curve. I had a mentor for the first 15 years of my beekeeping career, but I didn't know it was becoming a career. And I didn't worry about failing. I didn't have to worry about loss because it wasn't my operation.
Right. That's kind of fortunate in a learning process, right?
It sure is. Having a mentor in anything, I think, is super valuable. And it's mentorship, apprenticeship, we don't see them quite as much as they used to be.
Yeah, yeah. So take us back then. So how long ago was this that you got started? Or actually, let's go back a little bit further before that. So what was it in the long run, and how did you get involved with beekeeping? Was this something that you grew up around, or is this something that later on you just kind of, again, found a fascination for and started,
Well, although I know that my great grandfather had bees, it didn't really come from that. After graduating high school in North Carolina, where I grew up, I moved to Florida, started a community college, needed a job for gas money, met a girl whose father was a beekeeper and needed help. And that's all there was to it. There was no desire. There was no need. No, I want to be a beekeeper. I
Yeah.
just bees, so I qualified and passed the exam.
The exam. So this is where did you take this exam?
It wasn't actually an exam. It was just a single question. The guy said, "Are you
Oh,
afraid of?" I said no, so I passed.
oh, you passed. There you go.
Yeah.
That was kind of like my visit yesterday I did to the Southern Oregon Bee Association. Because I was, I did let her know right at hand, this is my first time being around beehives. This is my first time doing that. So she was asking me as we were there, as we're hanging around the hives, and she's like, "So how are you feeling?" And I'm like, "Man, I'm telling you what, I mean, at first, coming from my past and how I felt about bees, from early age to where I am right now, I told her, I was like, I feel like I'm in Disneyland right now. And they got all these cool bees flying around and it's all this, everything. I told her, I says, I'm doing great. This is awesome."
Cool. It especially feels good when you have that screen between you and the bees.
That is a big help too. Definitely. I would love to maybe be at some point in time as comfortable as I see a lot of beekeepers, which I don't know how they can do it as well yet, but maybe eventually down the road, I'll be able to get around some hives without having to worry about wearing the suit, right?
Totally possible.
Yeah, yeah. I guess isn't that kind of like just kind of how your attitude is around them and all of that too as well? I mean, can't they kind of feel you in a way? That's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, "Man, get in there, just, you know, be comfortable." You know what I mean? And then they'll be more comfortable with you.
I totally agree. I approached my beekeeping not intentionally in the beginning, but it morphed into approaching them energetically and with intention. And I don't use a bee suit
Yeah.
unless they really make me. There's,
Right.
every once in a while where they're just feeling a little feisty, but I don't want to put on a bee suit. It's hot. So I approached my bee with an understanding, a knowing, a familiarity, and a calm energy that, because it is calming, it's calming for me. And I don't worry about making them angry because I understand them.
Yeah. Yeah, and again too, I guess that kind of comes down to what I was talking about just before we got started with this segment, talking about, understanding what their purpose is, was a big thing, for me in getting more comfortable with just generally the bees in my garden,
Mm.
and with my garden, I got a lot of things growing, so there's a lot of flowers out there, so I got to have a lot of bees around to make sure that things are getting pollinated correctly. And so that was kind of a part of that experience or learning curve, was first, just really understanding what their purpose is and how they're helping me out.
That's excellent, because when the bees are on the flowers, that's the best time to observe them and get close, because they're out foraging. They're just going out and getting groceries.
Yeah.
A threat from you because you're not near their home, threatening their babies, their nest, and their food supply.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Teach treats here is like, beekeeping with no suit, better be careful. Yeah, right, right, exactly. But yeah, definitely, it's a great thing. So you worked in commercial beekeeping for a while. That was really kind of like where you got most of your learning experience, anyways.
Yep, and he was still learning too, but he had already had like 30 or 40 years under his belt. So it was a huge advantage. He sold a lot of orange blossom honey in 55-gallon drums to honey bottlers. And not only did I have his influence and mentorship, but a lot of other commercial beekeepers from other states came to that area to winter their bees before
Mhm.
going, say, almond pollination in California. So I got to see a lot of different perspectives, different manners of operation, and was able to form my own opinions based on my observations, which is the biggest way that I learn, is by observing.
Yeah, okay. So then you did this, like I think you said, for what, 10, 15 years or so, right? This is kind of
Yep.
a what you did for a career, basically for a good amount of time. What was it in that process towards the end of that 15 years or so that you started thinking about, well, let me do something on my own with this. Let me build a business or of my own.
There was two main factors involved. One, it was something I knew, I was familiar with. I believe
Yeah.
that. And two, I'd actually decided to quit because I didn't like what I was seeing in the commercial industry. But I had decided, you know what, I think I could come up with a better way. And I like that kind of personal challenge. And so I attempted a better way. No chemicals, none of this stuff where the bees are treated like a commodity. I wanted to treat them as an entity from an intuitive perspective. And you know what? I found out when I moved to North Georgia, which is where I keep bees now, that it worked. And so now I'm always tweaking and working on my system, teaching others to do the same, to come from an approach of more of a respect and intuition, which I keep saying, and you'll always hear me say, rather to try to balance out the scientific aspect and end of the spectrum in beekeeping.
Yeah, that's great. And tell me a little bit more about that kind of, how and what brought you to maybe a more like sustainable way of taking beekeeping, if I might.
Yeah, so there's one thing to understand the inner workings of a hive, but you will level that up. Your knowledge of beekeeping will level up when you understand what influences the inner workings of the hive, which is the outer workings of the hive, the environment, what's blooming, when is it blooming, and for how long does it bloom, the things that really support a honeybee colony. And so whenever I chose to start identifying plants and learning the seasons and their transitions, I I could understand what was going on inside of the hive, or at least what should be going on inside of the hive, so that I have a full year management system and am able to
Mhm.
implement that with consistency, whether it's pest and disease management, uh, general colony management, apiary management, which is where you're trying to treat them all on the same level and
Yeah,
successful.
excellent. Right on. And so again, then you built this up. Your website for everybody is the what is it? Be Native Apiaries.
That is the name of my business. My website is benativehoney.com.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. BeNativeHoney.com. And so you sell some honey as well too through what you do there as well, right?
Yep, we specialize in two varieties here. Wildflower, our Southern Appalachian wildflower, made in the foothills of the Southern Appalachians, and our Southern Appalachian sourwood, which is a highly sought after variety because it's the only place in the U.S. that makes it. It's very similar to Florida's Tupelo, Alaska's fireweed. So it's definitely on the top 10 list of honeys that you got to try.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Yeah, I definitely got to try some of that. There's so much good. And so tell me what is okay, so for people out there who might not know, what would be like the biggest difference between regular honey someone might go and purchase and raw honey? Because I know that that's one of the things that you talk about with your honey is it
So,
being raw and pure and all of that, right?
yeah, exactly. Regular honey is going to be considered something that's been processed, heated, therefore no longer a live food. Raw
Okay.
honey will be a live food where all the enzymes are still intact. That's what's going to be um, attributing to a healthier immune system, in my opinion. So the regular honey is more like a restaurant honey, things that are baked with, you're using cooking or dipping, things like that. And generally, the larger amounts of honey that the U.S. makes, like clover honey. It's got a flavor that's easily influenced and can blend well within anything. A raw honey is going to be something, especially a wildflower raw, because it's got more minerals and vitamins in it than just a one floral honey, which is a monofloral. A wildflower is wildflower because it's got two or more influences, two or more sources of floral nectar influencing not only the flavor but the contents of it.
Right on. Yeah. So sounds great. And again, to just a healthier honey for us in general versus like you said, if they're pasteurizing or heating or whatever these other honeys, there's probably just a loss of things that are probably important for us, like you're mentioning enzymes and all that.
Yeah, big time. So if you're gonna, it's best to buy honey from a beekeeper, someone you can ask what their practices are. Even if you don't know
Mhm.
questions to ask them, you'll learn as you build a relationship over time. But if you don't have a beekeeper, you don't know one that you can buy from, at least find something that says raw on the label and a flavor. If there's no flavor on that label, it's generally a blended product of lower quality.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that a little bit more, flavor. So, and then you were mentioning they're the bees are harvesting from certain types of flowers, and how is that how do you kind of get that so specific?
Well, I'll give you an example. When sourwood blooms in this area, there's
Yeah.
not much else blooming. So the greater majority of that honey variety is going to be sourwood. There might be other
Okay.
bits of nectar in it, but it's not enough to overpower it. Whatever the majority of a honey is generally what it's considered to be. And that's why wildflower isn't called tulip poplar or blackberry, but rather it describes a mix of all of them, a blend that the bees make themselves because all those things are blooming at the same time.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. So, because I've always kind of wondered that you hear, like, again, like you're saying, flavor. So, maybe a clover honey or some other sort of thing that I've heard. So, that's just basically what the hive is generally harvesting from kind of
Yeah,
at that given time of year, right?
exactly. Each plant that they harvest from will dictate the flavor of that honey. It's really what makes part of beekeeping so much fun and neat to be in because we've got that variety of flavor. We get to try different honeys.
Right on. Yeah. Let's see. And let's see here too. There was one other thing. Let's talk a little bit more about the beekeeping itself, though, too. Is there any sort of advice that you might have for beginning beekeepers? What is something that you might initially tell someone if they're just getting into starting with bees
I would
or
say
learning?
time for you to learn is winter
Mm.
when the bees are.
Okay.
That's when you can start to feed this. Feed your mind and begin learning.
Yeah.
Feed your bees in the spring. Join a club, a local club, ideally. Find someone else that you can bounce ideas off of with, and learn the basics of what you need equipment-wise before you go and break the bank. Because there's so many tools and equipment in beekeeping that are unnecessary. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
if you ever seen a beekeeping catalog, it's fun to look at, but a lot of it is not necessarily needed, especially at the beginner level.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, because for me, like I said, I'm at the very beginner level, and like I mentioned, I went to this bee association or Southern Oregon Bee Association yesterday to go check all of this out. And I think that, I think that was one of the things, and most like even gardeners, when we get started gardening and growing, we just kind of, oh wow, this is great, it's so awesome, and then you just want to do all of this stuff at once, you know what I mean? And I just want to do it now and everything. I think that was probably one of the biggest things for me to realize even yesterday in talking with them at the bee association, was that there's a lot more to learn about this, and it's probably really good to get and learn as much as you can before you even get started. Don't go out and buy beehives. Don't go out and get yourself bees without figuring out this real big learning curve that most will have to take in order to get started.
You got it.
Yeah, yeah, because there's a lot to know about that. So, what are probably so say you are and you do got yourselves all set up there and have learned for a while and all that. What are probably some of those first things that you need to be thinking about as you're really just getting going with bees and you're getting your first hive?
I I always recommend to my students to learn the 7 methods of minimal disturbance, which is something I developed. It's in my book, The Intuitive Beekeeper, but it teaches us not to get too involved. It's so easy to be excited about your bees. You just want to dig into the box,
Mhm.
but they've created a homeostatic environment. It needs to be maintained in a certain order without too much disturbance. So learning those basics as a foundation helps you to move forward as you learn the season and climate in your area. The major sources of nectar your area offers and the minor ones, when they bloom, when they stop blooming, how long. Those things will really get you some good experience under your belt so that you can begin to trust your own observation. That's where I come from in my book, is to learn to trust yourself and find the answers from what you already know to be able to move forward. Because no matter what, when we move forward, we will find out whether what we initially thought was right or wrong, and then we can alter and tweak from there and recalibrate.
Yeah, that's some great advice, definitely. And then one of the questions I saw as I was looking at too there, bee management, hive management, and that sort of thing in your bee yard or whatever. So you manage your hives to help also support native bees as well too. What is some advice on that as well? Because I know that's kind of important too, as we're thinking about getting beehives too.
Yeah, it is important, because the first time I kept bees in Georgia, I kept all of them in one location, one apiary. And when I went to harvest, I realized all my bees made some honey, but not a lot. And it made me think, what if there's too much competition among my own bees? Which made me realize after that, there's probably too much competition from my bees and the native pollinators in my area. So I decided to start cutting down on the number of colonies that I maintain in one area to 16 to 20 before I establish another apiary at least 2 miles away. And that way, I'm not only supporting my own colonies without shooting myself in the foot or them, but I'm maintaining that native pollinator as well. That's why I call my business Bee Native, because it's in support of the whole system.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was great too, about what you're doing there and all of that. And also, just tell us a little bit more about Be Native and your business as well too here.
Well, if you've ever seen my logo, it's got 2 feathers sticking out of the top of
Yeah.
Native. And the story behind that was, I didn't have a wood shop when I first started building my equipment when I moved to Georgia, but I did have a Native American style teepee, and I made that my workshop. So I've always had an interest in natives. And so I liked that I was able to make that a part of my logo, but also my practices, because in my mind, natives were one with the land, right? They knew what they were doing, they knew where to get things, and they were very sustainable about it. There was no ravaging the land. There was respect. And I carry that into my methods and into my teaching practices for beekeepers that really want to learn how to support their bees in the fullest manner that they can.
I think, Teach Treats was asking here too. I thought when we're getting back to those flavor profiles, can you blind test the different flavors and tell them apart?
My first date with my now wife had a honey tasting involved, and I did not do as well as I thought that I should have. But it was still fun, and she married me anyways. So,
Oh, perfect. Yes.
I'm going to say blindfolded. You can definitely tell a difference between flavors, especially back to back. Could I identify what it was? I would say maybe 40% of the time.
About 40%?
Yeah.
That would probably be definitely a lot better than I could do for sure. That's for sure. But and it probably gets better and better as more and more experience you get, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, right on. Excellent. And also too, you did, I guess, kind of mention just a little bit there too. You did write a little book there called The Intuitive Beekeeper. You want to tell us just a little bit more about that?
Yes, it basically gives you a step-by-step. For example, how to approach a hive. I observe and learn what's going on outside before I start ripping their roof off and looking inside. And then once I do get inside, what's the proper way to do it in order to minimize casualties? And that means you getting stung and them putting off the alarm pheromone, because when a honeybee stings you, it rips it out of its abdomen and they die as well. So how can we minimize that? And then we start inspecting the colony. What do we do with the results? There's no one around to really tell us that when we're learning beekeeping on our own. So I walk the reader through how to think through what they're observing so that they can begin to rely on themselves. I teach how important it is to make queen keeping probably at the top of the scale. Instead of being beekeepers, ideally we should be queen keepers because when the queen is doing well, when we have a nice quality queen, then everything else is going to follow in place. And probably one of the biggest things in this day and age when it comes to pests, I teach that it's important to come up with a multi-method of a consistent pest and disease management system so that nothing is adapting to that and it's as natural as it can be, but also effective so that your bees can be thriving and healthy.
Right on. That's excellent. And definitely got to get in that as like I said, I'm just so like fascinated now, even more so that I got to get around my very first hives this week and everything too. So, I mean, just this whole world of beekeeping is just getting even more and more fascinating to me. And again, huge learning curve, and it's really great that there's folks out there like yourself who are out there, sharing your experiences and putting that out there in ways that we can all just learn just a little bit more about what we can do in the process of learning about beekeeping. So Jonathan, I really want to thank you so much for spending your time again here with us today to talk about all of that. And real quick before we go though, you want to also just let everybody know again about your website and where everybody can find you. And also I do have link right down below in the description.
Yeah, of course. So my website again, beenativehoney.com. You can find my honey varieties on there, my book. There will be other things that I add in the future, so keep track of that. And my YouTube channel, The Hive Doctor. It's geared towards taking the guesswork out of beekeeping.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, right on, Jonathan. Thank you so much. And I encourage everybody again to go check out Jonathan's website again to beenativehoney.com. And again, also a link to his videos and YouTube right down below in the description there. Definitely go and give this guy a subscribe on his channel there, and also go leave him a comment on one of his videos and let him know that you saw him here on the Let's Get Growing show. Again, thanks, Jonathan, so much for being with us today. It was great to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Hey gardeners, thanks for tuning in to our show today. We'll be right back at it here in just a moment. I just wanted to take a second here to highlight our regular videos and features here on the Urban Gardener channel. Our weekly garden journals, and our incredible featured visits.
The answer to this week's trivia question is C. Honeybees visit thousands of flowers every day, collecting nectar and pollen. The nectar, of course, is used to make honey, but the pollen is taken back to the hive and consumed as the bee's main source of protein. The average colony can collect as much as 125 pounds of pollen every year, and each individual worker bee can carry up to 35% of her own body weight at any given time. Thanks for watching. Head over to Sarah's Seed Shop where you can find garden seeds at unbeatable prices. Enjoy the rest of the show and have a great day.
All right, all right, all right. Did you get Sarah's trivia question right? I see that Serena did, and Rob over from Rob's Allotment Gardening over in the UK. He said he got it right too. Awesome, awesome. Great question this week from Sarah at sarahseedshop.com. Definitely get down below in the link and go check out Sarah's Seed Shop, and go check out, especially right now, get in there. I know here real soon we're going to start getting inundated in our mailboxes with all of our great seed catalogs and all of these new great varieties that'll be coming up and everything here real soon. But if you got to get all of them great essentials, you're not going to beat Sarah's prices and what you get in amount of seed and all of that. So you'll definitely want to go and get all of your essential gardening seeds at sarahseedshop.com. Like I said, link down below. And also one of the great things about doing a show on beekeeping, you've all been kind of really right there in that chat too, so definitely jump in the chat. But everybody's been in there with some really great bee puns. I just love it. It's great, and there's so many of them, but keep them coming. I love the bee puns. It's really funny. Right on. And thank you everybody again too for joining us here today. So we've got a really great guest here joining with us here in just a moment. I can't wait to talk to Kamon Reynolds about everything about beekeeping. And well, I guess without further ado, let's just go ahead and get right into it.
You never know when you might learn something, and that's what this is about for me. These are people that I admire. Please welcome my next guest.
All right, everybody. Let's welcome Kamon Reynolds to the Let's Get Growing show. Thank you so much, Kamon, for joining with us today. And especially, and I just say this, especially a huge thank you for joining with us today, last minute. I know we talked about this late last night, had some changes we needed to make, but really thank you so much for taking your time today and joining with us today.
No problem. Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah, we can hear you there. Definitely.
Good deal. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I love gardening quite a bit. It's what got me into beekeeping when I was gardening around 12, 13 years old. I started doing farmers markets at 14 and found an observation hive and tried some honey, and went from doing a few thousand meat birds, Joel Salatin style, and then decided that honey was the route that I wanted to go. But we still grow a pretty good garden ourselves, and definitely there's a lot of synergetic whatever energies between one side of the other. There's a lot of fun to be had on both sides of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that aspect like you're talking about, and especially the fact that you got to get into it all at a younger age too, especially gardening and everything, and having that experience at a young age. Me, a little later in life, I might be considered maybe a little bit more of a late bloomer in that sort of sense of it all. But I found gardening and found it to be such a big, then became a big part of my life and all of that. But as I kind of talked about too, towards the beginning of the show and all of that, is that gardening really for me changed a lot of how I saw, bees in general, or any of the other flying insects and things flying around my garden and all of that, because it was something that you definitely got to get used to. If you're going to grow a bunch of food, you're going to need a bunch of bees flying around your garden and pollinating everything. And so it was that kind of learning about that necessity that created, instead of this fear I had when I was a kid. I got stung when I was a little kid, and man, from that point on, it just sat in my brain, that these things are out to get me, and so it was later on in getting in that garden that it was like, wait a minute, these guys are really necessary. So what I need to do, and I mentioned earlier too, is turn this fear into a fascination, and then just really dig in and learn about what they're doing and all of that too. So what was that, again too, what was that like again though too for you as a young kid, as you were first getting to learn and discover bees and what they were doing in the garden, and what that relationship to what you were gardening and growing?
Well, when you're 14, that's the first year I got into bees. You really don't know a lot, and so you're just figuring out everything in general. But you think at 14 you got a few things figured out, and so getting into bees for the first time was a little bit scary. When you open up that lid and you hear these insects roaring, what I heard was actually a calm sound, but what it what it says to me now is that things are good. But at that time, I had no clue. Might as well have been a roar of a lion. And we had a lot of cucumbers. We were doing CSAs and farmers markets at that time. My brother helped me. I had around a quarter acre of strawberries around that period too, and so my hope was that my honeybees would really help with pollination, and they did. Of course, along the way, we found that there's a lot of crops that honeybees don't pollinate, but some that they absolutely love, and some that they don't. But there's a lot of other pollinators, bumblebees, and so many types of beetles and moths that are also critical for pollinators. So, being a beekeeper really was the whole trifecta for me. On I love woodworking. I was doing that with my grandpa since a young age, so I was able to build my own equipment. I love the great outdoors, and I love to grow and eat healthy food. So those are kind of the three things for me. And there's a lot of plants that I got to learn along the way, and I'm still learning about plants because in Tennessee we have a lot of different types of flora and fauna. So we're always learning something new. And if you like the great outdoors, beekeeping is a nice addition to your garden, and it's pretty sweet, pun intended.
Pun intended. Here we go. Let's keep them rolling. I love it. That's great. So uh, again, too, this was who was it? So you said you at 14. You probably discovered your first hive. Who was this again? Who you got this knowledge from, or first started your first beekeeping with?
So I didn't do things the best way, in my opinion. And there was a couple, an older couple. I'm not sure if they're still alive yet or not, but I was working at a sorghum festival. I also play bluegrass music, play mandolin, and I don't play as much these days, but I was playing a gig there, and they had an observation hive, which is just for those of you who don't know, it's a couple frames of bees behind glass, and so you can observe what the bees are doing. But the bees can't get out and get to anybody. They're just in there for a day, and usually the beekeeper takes them back home and installs them back into their hive. And so I was able to observe the bees through the glass windows, and also he had two types of honey there. And I talked to him and his wife, and that was the first time I got to taste real honey. Prior to that, I'd only had the stuff that you get in the little teddy bears at Wally World. And the majority of the time, that is not real honey, or it's mixed with high fructose corn syrup or rice syrup. And so many people who taste those types of honeys are really disappointed and are like, yeah, I just don't like honey. The reality of it is, we have the largest honey show in North America, and we will have white honeys, we'll have motor oil black honeys, there's green tinted honeys, yellow honeys, red ambers, everything in between. And you have some that are a little bit spicy, some that are very floral and fruity flavored. And then you have some that don't have a lot of flavor at all, and they're very like cotton honey. It's just very sweet. And some of them will crystallize and go to what we call go to sugar. They just go from a liquid into a crystallized form. And then we have some that will never do that. And so when I got to taste that for the first time, it really blew my mind. And honestly, the entrepreneur in me was like, so you're telling me that this jar of honey right here isn't going to go bad even 10 years from now? And they're like, yeah,
Right.
it doesn't ferment unless water is introduced into it. And I'm looking over at it. I'm going, my tomatoes that I grow and sell at the farmer's market, I can't, because I pick them almost ripe or very close. I can get maybe 3 or so days of being able to sell that before,
Well, yeah.
it's got to be either dehydrated or
Yeah,
canned or
that market
something.
gardener and is really starting to think, huh?
And I'm like, how hard could this be? Very hard. Honestly, but so is gardening, but it's very fulfilling. And it turned out to be where my entire career is now. I do a garden for my personal use, and
Yeah.
I graft some apple trees from time to time. But everything's pretty much centered around the bee business right now, selling honey, beeswax, pollen, and of course YouTube and our conference. So fun.
Yeah. So again, too, maybe we can what is it? Because that fascinated me too, as I was, getting to learn a little bit more about bees and honey extraction and things like that as well too. Is when I heard that honey will just last for however long it'll last.
Mhm.
So I mean, what would you say how long it would last, and what would be kind of some of the reason behind that as well too? I mean,
Okay.
it's
So,
literally one of those only like food products that this is the case in, right?
right. And so there's a lot of truth to it just almost being immortal. There's also a few things that get left out or just aren't people don't get exposed to in typical media. Sometimes you'll see online where they've discovered honey in Egyptian tombs and it was edible. But Egypt is pretty darn dry. There's, if you were to store that honey in a very humid area and it wasn't sealed, then honey is hygroscopic. And so it is going to pull moisture into it if it's available to pull into it. And so eventually the water content will get above 18%. 18% or lower is ideal, preferably around 17 to 16%, in my opinion. But anything getting close to 19, 20 and of moisture content, we're going to start seeing possibly some fermentation. And so honey is just has very little moisture content, and because of that, and also it's acidic, and it has enzymes and various things in it as well. These activities are killing microbes, and it's just very antibacterial, antifungal, and that's one of the reasons why it is used and has been used for a long time for light cuts and scrapes. We definitely use it for ourselves and for our kids because one of the things that's not known about honey is when it does come in contact with higher levels of moisture. Let's say you put a drop on a small cut on your skin.
Right.
It will pull some of the water from your body. You have plenty of water in your body. And as it dilutes itself down, hydrogen peroxide is created. And so it helps not only it's a continued antiseptic is what it is. It also has other properties in it that helps bring healing to that, and it keeps the wound from drying out, and so it keeps it healthier. So honey can be really useful. Now, if you cut your arm off, you really need to go see a doctor. It doesn't work quite that good, but I have articles from where sea turtles have gotten hit by propellers, and because sea turtles are organic creatures, and apparently they like them more than humans. If you go get cut up by a propeller, you're going to get all kinds of chemicals. And sometimes these things can be very life-saving and helpful. But for the sea turtles, they will pack them with honey and beeswax and propolis, all products of the beehive, because they are so much better than the chemicals, and they're obviously natural.
Yeah.
And so that's what they use for sea turtles and stuff. Maybe not in every case, but definitely in this case. And the report was they had to change the bandages half as much because it works that much longer and better than the average product. And of course, honey is
Wow.
from nectar. Beeswax is created from bees gorging on the nectar and honey and creating beeswax.
Wow.
Through their abdomens. They have 8 scale placements. And then the propolis is resins gathered from plants, and it is way more antimicrobial and antifungal than honey is. And so we call it bee glue primarily, but propolis, those things right there are extremely healthy. And many cultures use these things constantly. And here in the U.S., we don't use them quite as much.
Right, right. Let's see. Sam asked real quick too. Hydroscopic, was that the term?
That makes sense right there. Like hydro, I would think water.
Yeah.
But it's actually hygro, GRO,
Okay.
is the correct term, and it's hygroscopic.
Oh,
And
excellent.
but boy, it confused me the first time. I think I said that on YouTube one time, and somebody was like, "You mean hygroscopic?" And I Google is your friend sometimes.
It can't be. And I'll tell you though too, and just on that, I knew I was going to be learning a ton of stuff here today and all of that, and just something I did not and even think about too was the fact that honey to be used as, I mean, right on a wound, to be using this like out of your medicine cabinet. Now that's a whole nother idea to me right there. As you said, we're not familiar with that here much in the States and everything too. So is this, I mean, you're literally just take some raw honey, you get a cut on your arm or something like that, and you just literally apply that, maybe slap a bandage over it. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
So what I do, because um, nothing is perfect in my opinion. There's always, honey's not going to get dirt out of your wound.
Right,
It's
right. Wash
it
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 probably.
right. So what we'll do with our kids and ourselves is we typically take hydrogen peroxide and we rinse the wound out with that, and so that neutralizes a lot right there. And then pat dry, put just enough honey to cover the wound, just a very thin layer. And then we're going to put a Band-Aid over the top of that if the wound requires a Band-Aid. And that works really good, again, because it creates hydrogen peroxide as it dilutes down. And so we're continuing that hydrogen peroxide effect right there. And it also works really good for the bees too. So one of the reasons bees benefit from nectar is not because honey is loaded down with tons of minerals and vitamins. There are some really good things in there, but they're tiny amounts. And they're typically not the big things we think of, like calcium and these big heavy minerals. Honey's got a lot of smaller things that are just really good for the immune system. And so it's that way for bees too. But honey and nectar is primarily an energy source. You got to think of bees really kind of halfway between a car and a mammal, almost is the way I look at it. They require fuel. They don't
Mhm.
require nutrition like we do. So they can't flap their wings. They can't heat up the hive. They can't cool down the hive without that honey energy. It is the fuel of the hive. But as they bring in the nectar, when it's thin and they ripen it up to honey, hydrogen peroxide is created. And this purifies the bee. This purifies the combs they place it in, and is very healthy for the colony to do that. Once it goes into a thick honey state, the hydrogen peroxide activity ceases. And then it's only when it's diluted again that the activity starts back up. And so there's a lot of interesting things that go on in the beehive, and we definitely don't fully utilize a lot of the gifts that the bees bring to us. The pollen that they bring, that if you're wanting minerals and vitamins, the pollen is where it's at. That's where the protein's at.
Yeah. And how is that? Okay, so how and when and what are we looking at as far as that sort of extracting pollen versus nectar or honey?
So everywhere is different, right? And
Yeah.
Tennessee is what I'm most used to. I did take some of my bees up to Wisconsin this year, which was quite fun. But it all depends on what the native plants are doing, and not all plants that bloom are good for honeybees. So my season starts in February. It's very cold, but the maple trees are so hardy, they produce pollen in February. That early stuff my bees need, because that'll be the first boost from a winter cluster of about a cantaloupe to basketball size. Once that pollen comes in, that triggers, it's time to start rearing brood to build up for the honey flow. And so that pollen is critical for those bees. And it takes about a frame of pollen, or a pound of pollen and a pound of honey, to make a pound of bees. And not all pollens are created equal. Maple pollen is very beneficial. Some pollens, like dandelion and sunflowers pollens, they need other pollens to create healthy bees. And so, often than not, in early spring, there's a plethora of various plants producing pollens, which makes a very healthy diet for the bee. Probiotics, vitamins, minerals. This is where all the bee powers. You can have a honey flow coming in, or
Yeah.
nectar coming in, but the bees will die if there's not pollen. They cannot raise more bees and grow their population without that. And once they bring in enough,
That's the energy source, right?
yeah, you got to have the proteins and fats and minerals and the building blocks of life that's coming from the pollens. Of course, the plants benefit from that through the pollination process. But some plants produce nectar only, some produce pollen only, some produce both. And so when we start getting into March in Tennessee, we start seeing tons of pollen in late March and early April. And sometimes, and especially a good year where you just get a lot of flying days back to back to back, the bees will just bring in so much of that and nectar. This is where you get into a lot of swarming, because the colony is, bees base everything off of stimuli. So if they're seeing all these resources and the queen's running out of room to lay because there's all these resources and there's tons of bees spread out all through the hive, and that means her pheromones are not as likely to be spread through the hive as efficiently either, because it's so large. These stimuli trigger the bees to swarm and reproduce, which is, just like a cow giving birth to a calf. That's how they are able to make increase. During this time, though, one of the things that we can do to prevent some of the swarming, and also to help generate some revenue or just serious health benefits for ourselves, is to put in pollen traps. And we will trap for 1 day on, 1 day off, because we want to make sure we don't take too much pollen from the bees. And we can't do this most of the year. We're probably trapping pollen off and on for about 2 months. And that's all we can do it for the year. But a strong colony with good weather can produce a couple dozen pounds of pollen for that year. And
So
people
what would
pay
trapping kind of consist of?
So trapping, essentially, we call it pollen trapping, but the bees bring it in on their hind leg. They have a special appendage for packing that pollen basket. And as they go through these devices, it's a little too thin for them, and they kind of have to shuck them off to get through to the entrance. So it's really just shucking the baskets off, dropping it into a tray below. And some people dehydrate it, but honestly, the easiest way to preserve it is to just pull that tray out at the end of the day and make sure you sift out anything that maybe got in there. Then you just put it in a freezer bag, and I use it on Greek yogurt. I'll take some honey, Greek yogurt, a little sprinkle of cinnamon, and then a spoonful of pollen. And you can do a lot of research on your own on this as well, folks. But those things right there, you can just forget taking your vitamin supplement from the store. This is going to be a lot easier for you to absorb as well, because nature's prepared it for you, and this is the stuff that we were supposed to have. So that's just my personal opinion on it. But
I love it.
Pollen is an essential part of the bee health. And so it's a combination of multiple things that are going on in the hive. And this is my 23rd year, and you just don't get bored with this stuff.
Yeah. And similar for me when it comes to gardening and all of that. I mean, I don't get bored with all of it. And now again, too, with just, again, getting to talk with you guys about this stuff is just driving my fascination even more. And I've got to get into this a bit more and start to even eventually learn enough to where I can start getting some beehives maybe, or do some bee rescues or something. I'm not sure yet, but I still got a bit to learn. And let's actually talk a little bit. Like you said, you kind of got into learning about this a bit young and all of that, but at what point was it that you I don't know, was this really something you really considered a career? This is what you were doing?
That's a good question.
You said you were doing a few other things. You had a bunch of other interests probably when you were younger, young adult. I know we all do and everything, but there was a point probably where this was just like, this is what I got to be doing.
Yeah. So I've always been kind of an entrepreneur type. So I've, even as a 10-year-old, 9-year-olds, I was thinking, what can I do? And it really wasn't about money, because if you want to be rich, beekeeping and agriculture by and large is probably not the best place to start, especially if it's more on the natural side of things. And that's okay, because I wanted to be outdoors to enrich my life, to enrich my health. My mom had a lot of health problems. I also have had a lot of sugar related problems and still do. And I've always had that. Candies and food dyes have always greatly affected me. So that's part of the reason I got into growing food and beekeeping. But when I really started thinking about this as a career, I always knew I wanted to do something outdoors, but I wasn't sure if it was carpentry, building houses, or if it was going to be farming. But once I started really getting into the farming, I'm like, I'd like to do this. And I really thought until I was probably around 17 or 18, I was going to be doing farmers markets and CSAs. I was going to agricultural conferences, reading every book that Joe Salatin put out, and raising a lot of chickens. But over the course of about 3 or 4 years there, I was doing bees and I just enjoyed it so much. It was just so foreign. And honestly, it's easier to sell honey and in
Yeah.
smaller areas like this. The demand for honey is pretty high because there's not a lot of people that do it. And so I
Mhm.
looked at it from a business standpoint as well. I was like, okay, I'm competing with all these other people at the farmers market
Yeah.
with this other stuff, but nobody's doing pollen. Nobody's really doing honey, and not to a large extent. And I really enjoy it. So it was in my late teens, and my wife, who I met around that period, also had a few hives of bees. And so it was just kind of a thing that we did together. And we started the business in 2014 as an LLC. And it's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of work, but it's been very rewarding. And if I could change one thing if looking at this from a business standpoint, is I would have gone and worked for somebody for a while,
Right.
especially for young people. If I'd have spent 2 to 3 years of my life, seems like a lot when you're 18, 20 years old, like 2 to 3 years of my life. Oh my goodness, that's a long time. Once
Yeah,
you
for
start getting to
real.
your 30s or afterwards, that might have been a good investment. And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
had I gone and worked for somebody like my friend Bob Binney, who had already figured out so many of these things on his own. I mentioned kind of earlier, I started the wrong way. I just read a few books. YouTube wasn't really a thing so much back then. And honestly, you have to be careful with everything. And I wasn't always sourcing the best information. I always have leaned more towards organic and natural.
Mhm.
But sometimes that message is kind of used in a way to promote things that aren't true. Just because we all
Mm.
want to be natural
Yeah.
doesn't mean that, like, for example, squash bugs, they
Yeah.
are terrible on zucchini and squash plants and several things, and they're invasive. And there are some people with bees that are like, well, all these problems, the bees are going to evolve to naturally take care of this themselves. Nature will fix everything. Well, sometimes nature just makes something else go extinct. And
Mhm.
sometimes nature will eat you for dinner. And so it's a
Yep.
lot more complex than just believing that everything will take care of itself. Some things just don't work out. And,
Yeah, I find
or
that
if,
very true as well in gardening aspect as well too. It's very true. I like to consider myself a pure organic gardener, but you do got to be
Mhm,
careful with how and what you're thinking about in those sort of strategies, whether it's integrated pest management to deal with
sure.
certain things like that, like you're talking about squash bugs and all that sort of stuff. There are methods and ways that we got to do things, but you really do got to, you got to dig in and learn and then also gain some experience. And I'm sure that with gardening, it's probably a little more forgiving than to be taking care of bees, which are, a life, you know what I mean? And a hive being a life in a
Yeah.
sense. So,
You know, it,
you
it,
kind of, you might want to get some of that information a little bit better before you're actually taking care of something on that level, right?
sure. You want, as a beekeeper, I want to keep my bees. And as a gardener, growing plants, you prefer as many of your plants to survive as possible. And so with organic squash bug control, we can go, okay, well, we have the nuclear option, which is chemicals we don't want, and also could possibly kill pollinators. Honestly, watermelons, squash, those type of plants require so much pesticide on the commercial industry but they also require a lot of pollination. And so beekeepers
Mhm.
take their bees in there, and it's very difficult for beekeepers. Many times they get paid extra knowing that it's going to damage the colony to a degree to pollinate these crops because the pesticides are so rough. And the fungicides are too. A lot of times the fungicides get into the pollen, the bees bring it back, and it doesn't damage the adults who aren't really consuming it. It's the next generation that takes the hit. So with organic gardening, with the squash bugs, we use a row cover, and just it's a lot more maintenance and physical work. We will use some bacteria sprays too for the eggs, bacillus and whatnot.
Mhm.
But with beekeeping, that's the thing is I listened to some of the more natural gurus, and it was basically hands off beekeeping, and that doesn't work very well because nature doesn't care about all of your hives. It really doesn't. How bees work in the wild is they might swarm 5 to 6 times a year. Some
Right.
bees, like Africanized bees, will go 10 to 12 times a year, but
Mm.
nature doesn't really require all of those to survive. The other side of nature is there's other creatures out there that want to eat your bees because they're super nutritious and they have a honey-filled center. I mean, it's fantastic. Um, sorry.
You think of Winnie the Pooh, right?
That's right. You eat a honeybee and you're like, oh, protein, minerals, and ooh, I got
Delicious.
a honey-filled center here. It's fantastic. And so the there's other things in nature that want to survive too. And so
Mhm.
typically with swarms of bees in the wild, if only 1 out of 6 survive, they've replaced themselves and they're still able to kind of fulfill their need for that area and pollination. So nature can be as brutal as it is benevolent. And some years are worse than others. Droughts are hard on bees.
Mm.
And too much rain is hard on bees. Many beekeepers in this region had about half the honey yield because all of our honey in this region is produced over about 2 months. The surplus honey is produced in 2 months. It rained for about 4 weeks out of that 2-month period.
Oh, wow.
Bees can't fly. Bees are still
Yeah, can't
consuming
work.
resources.
Yeah.
So nature, there's some years we'll produce 120 pounds a hive, and there's some years we're lucky to do 50 on average. So I think having realistic expectations, and when you're a teenager, you haven't had a lot of experience, so going and working for someone who has that perspective and who is a successful keeper of bees, that would have been a wise decision. I could have made a little bit of money and learned from a professional,
Yeah.
and that would have helped me out a lot. But I think at this point, it's come back and really made it full circle because I did it the hard way and the long way. I think it's given me a good perspective to educate the beekeepers who are starting because I remember those lessons so vividly because they were expensive and they hurt, and I
Mhm.
didn't have someone show me how to avoid them. So now I'm trying to tell people how to avoid them. So
Right, right.
they don't spend $5,000 on bee gear and have a couple disappointing seasons and get out of it. Bees don't live very long. They only live about 5 to 6 weeks, and so
Really?
that's the worker
That
bee. So that's
Yeah,
a very short lifespan. So if something goes wrong with the colony,
yeah.
they disappear quickly. They go forward fast and they go backwards fast.
Oh, wow.
And so the queen, if she's laying 1,000 eggs a day, well, that's fantastic. But once the population tops out, you're losing 1,000 bees a day too,
Oh,
and
wow, yeah.
that's normal as long as the queen's still healthy and everything's going well. Well, that's fantastic. But there's people that watch some of my videos and they see some dead bees in maybe I don't know. Sometimes we'll be by a creek or a pond, and you need to put some sticks over there so they don't drown. There's bees just die all the time.
Yeah.
And I'll run about 40 colonies to a yard. So that's 40,000 bees dying in that location every day. And
Yeah,
so,
that's something we don't think about, and again, I kind of found fascinating as I was talking to, um, the Southern Oregon Bee Association yesterday and everything too, as we were looking at these hives. That was my first time getting to see them, and of course, you see the dead ones are right out in front of the hives. They're moving them out of their hives, and to me, as someone who doesn't know much, I'm like, "Oh, wow, what's happening to these bees?" You know? Yeah, and I suppose that even for a lot of other people, they get concerned and that sort of thing, but that was something was very interesting to understand was that information you just shared was that, yeah, I mean, just like any other living organism, they're dying as well too. I didn't quite know that it was so quick though. I mean, we're like 6 weeks lifespan is yeah, that's pretty quick.
yeah. So, for winter, they obviously have to live longer. And so you'll have winter bees and they really pack in the fat and they will go through winter, but they're not feeding new bees. They're not using their energy. They're trying to use as little energy as possible. So there's a lot of different dynamics in the hive.
Yeah.
But with beekeepers, it's important that we check our bees every other week if possible. And it can be a 3-minute inspection and go, okay, the bees have plenty of honey in here. All right, I'm seeing young eggs and larvae. And so there's an active queen laying in here. That looks good. And the population looks good. All right, fantastic. Let's put this together. Okay, maybe they're a little light on food. I'm going to feed them a little bit to help them out. And sometimes we do have to feed our bees, especially on the younger colonies. The bigger colonies that are established are a lot it's a lot easier for them to take care of themselves, especially in a generous year from the nectars and pollens. Many times there's little feeding required, if any, but the young splits and the young bees are often like a bottle calf, and they take some energy to help them mature to a full size colony. There was a question, Nick, if you don't mind me looking
Yeah.
at it. I
Oh
just
yeah.
wanted to. It was about raw honey and kind
Oh
of.
yeah. I was going to try to jump in here too in a minute and grab some of these questions here. Let's see. Where's that at?
And there was also a talk about diabetes and honey, and that there's different
Yeah,
stages
yeah.
of diabetes, and I'm not an expert in that at all. Honey can
Let's
be
see.
beneficial
Yeah.
for
Is there a
some people.
specific kind of honey that is best for health benefits and is safe for diabetics? And
That
then I'm
is
not sure if I got the
uh,
exact question, but go ahead and go on that as well too, if you want.
Sure, sure. Well, that one's out of my wheelhouse. Again, there's different stages of diabetes, and there's different types of honey. All honeys have a lot of sugar in them, and so I know some diabetics do benefit from using honey, but also some of them can't have it. So
Yeah,
there, as far as what honeys are better for that,
yeah.
I don't really know. I'm sure there
Okay.
may be a couple out there, but there's thousands of varieties from across the world. Some that are as hot as a chili pepper, and
Mhm.
there are some that are, again, different. There's all kinds of different things out there, but I would
Sure,
say,
that's probably
well,
good to check in with a good dietitian or someone like
yeah.
that who's got that better kind of knowledge. She was also asking too here, is she said she's seen sugar-free honey, and,
Mhm.
is it real honey if it's
N-
sugar-free?
it's not. So there's a lot of different styles of honey out there. Well, let me back that up. They call themselves honey. They're not honey.
Right.
So there's vegan honeys out there. They make honeys from like uh, honeys from sweet potato and stuff like that, and even a few other things like sugar free honey. Um, it's not honey, and so I really have a hard time with that, and so do a lot of other people. And hey, sometimes those things can be healthy. I'm not a guy that's like you can only eat honey. That's ridiculous. I do think there's a lot of health benefits to the honey that the bees impart, and so do the plants. But um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that want to take advantage of the name honey
Right.
and its benefits and put it on their product that doesn't have all kinds of special little minerals and chemicals and things that are good for our body and our immune system. Now, one of the questions was about raw honey, and that one really is a topic that many people in beekeeping argue about until they're blue in the face. And so I'd like to say my two pieces on this because
Absolutely.
some some people don't look at the facts on this, and so honey doesn't need to be heated to a degree. That's part of it. But some people like if you heat it at all.
Pasteurization, basically?
Right. So there's different styles of heating. I do warm my honey slash heat it, but I also know when you start damaging your honey, which begins closer to 100 to 105 degrees. And that's low level damaging. When they pasteurize this stuff and nuke it, it's more around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's very quick, but that does kill some enzymes and stuff like that pretty good. We don't need to do that. But think about this. I harvest my honey in June. How hot do you
Mhm.
think it is in
That's what
June?
I was just gonna ask is, if you're getting at that level, I mean, I had some 110-degree days this year,
Yeah.
so
And
that hive, if they're outdoors, they're gonna be sitting all day in or at least at that peak point of the day at 110 degrees.
and the bees can cool the hive down to a degree, but
Okay.
the supers that are way on top, typically they'll let them get hotter because they're mainly trying to control the brood area. And so they will control
Mhm.
that area to a degree. They're not going to let it get too hot to where it's going to melt the combs and have problems. But it is normal for honey to get in the upper 90s and 100 area. But that doesn't always mean that that's best either for long periods. A lot of this damage on around the 100-degree mark is very low damage over a long period. It can be a problem. It's not unhealthy for
Yeah.
humans. It's actually more unhealthy for bees as honey degrades. So that's the thing. Like that honey in the Egyptian tomb that was like 2,000 years old, humans
Yeah.
could eat that. If you fed that to bees, it would probably be absolutely toxic to them
Mhm.
because of certain chemicals that are created that are just their guts can't handle it. Ours can.
Right.
And so the degradation of honey is a real thing, but we typically warm our honey when we bottle it to 90 degrees because that's a very safe temperature. And honey is very viscous. And we get ours about 16%. So when you're pumping that through a stainless steel pump, you definitely need that warmed a little bit, or you'll burn your pump up many times. And then, so that's one of the things people want to talk about, the heat. So that is a fact, and also filtering. But a lot of us, we call it straining, so it doesn't get tied into the word filtering. But a lot of us filter. But pollen grains are so tiny that it takes a massively fine filter to filter the little beneficial things in there. And so we use like a 200 mesh strainer / filter, and it gets just the really big chunks of wax. We run thousands of frames through an extractor, and they're wooden frames. There's an off chance that there may be a small splinter that comes off of a piece of wood. We obviously don't want that in the jar. So there are some people, like, if we're not seeing bits of material in the jar, it's not raw honey. I disagree. We don't want to damage it, but I do want to remove the wax, and I do want to remove any possible pieces of wood or anything else that could get in there. So it ends up being a nice clean product, and it also will retard possible crystallization, because I don't want that in a jar that's like this or a glass jar. Most people freak out about it. Many cultures love crystallized honey. In Europe and parts of Canada, it's very, very popular to have creamed honey.
Oh, wow.
And it's just crystallized honey. They'll actually do it on purpose, though, and make it to where you get a very fine crystal to where it's like almost spreading butter on toast. It's delicious. And they'll add vanilla bean to it, which is, like candy, and chocolate powder and all kinds of things, and lemon flavor. And then there's those weirdos that do pickled habanero. And I'm just like, come on, guys, you've wasted the honey now. But
right,
this raw honey idea, I really think that it's helpful to get those out of there, so I don't get the crystallization when I don't want it. And where you have to be really careful as someone who's bottling honey is, let's say your honey is 18% water moisture content. That is typically safe, but you're right on the edge there. And what can happen is, if your honey is the type that'll crystallize, and what determines that is just what type of plants they come from. Some have this type of plant sugars, some have this type of plant sugars, and the ratio of that will determine on if it will crystallize, how fast it will or not. So, but if my honey is the type that's going to crystallize, and I'm riding the line on the moisture content, you get separation when that happens. All the honey typically doesn't do it at once. So you'll have part of the honey that gets crystallized, and that honey sugar crystals drops to the bottom of the jar. And now you get more of the moisture content that goes to the top of the jar. And that's where you'll get some of the top honey that will ferment, because it gets around 20% or more. And so the customer will be like, my honey's gone bad. And you can still actually eat this, but it does taste kind of like, something's wrong here.
right.
Yeah, because there is something wrong. So that's why we typically will take a dehumidifier. If the bees haven't already done this themselves, most years they do. Some years are extra humid. And we always have a dehumidifier and some fans going in our honey drying room, so that we can make sure the moisture content gets around 16.5, 17%. And that just gives us a lot of a buffer there. So sorry, I get on my little tangents here.
Not a problem. I love the information. Like I said, it's great. And let's jump into a couple of questions here real quick too. Let's see, one of them that just popped up, actually. I think that kind of goes with what we're saying here real quick. Is it possible to get bee parts in the extracted honey too? Most people don't like bee legs and other bee parts inside their honey. I suppose it's possible, right?
So this guy's got a bee veil on in the picture, so he obviously is a weirdo like me. Yes, this can happen. Like I said, 1,000 bees die every day, and some of them perish in various forms and fashions. And as much as beekeepers, we would like to not damage a single bee. It's going to happen. It doesn't matter how natural you are, how slow you are going to hurt a bee. That's I personally think okay. We're not trying to do it intentionally. We build these hives and do these things to prevent that. The way I look at it is we are partners with the bees, and bees have some weaknesses. And obviously, we have weaknesses too when it comes to pollinating. We're terrible pollinators. We're terrible at making honey. We can't do that. It just wouldn't work. And so, but the bees have some weaknesses, and we will look at the bees' natural behavior. And we base our beekeeping off of that. And what that is bees are like anything for survival. If the queen's not doing her job right, we pull her apart limb from limb, and we kill her.
Yeah.
Because we need a good queen. And we don't need drones anymore because we're not trying to, it's late in the season, resources are getting scarce. You're just an expense, and they kill all the drones. They get rid of those things. Any older bees going into winter. So you have your winter bees that are very fat and young. They're going to be able to survive your winter season. Any of the old bees who are past that point and were foragers for fall, they run themselves out of the hive and just die to exposure, get eaten by a spider, who knows what. And so the colony is all about this survival mindset. And as beekeepers, I personally believe we need to share in that, to where if we see a queen that's having an issue or whatever, we are going to requeen that colony and help those bees out. Many times the bees do it themselves. Sometimes they do not. And so we do lose bees, but I'm trying to kind of paint an overall perspective on kind of what you have to have with beekeeping, because we're giants. We're the size of a skyscraper to them, and you cannot fool with those bees without that happening. But bees are designed for attrition. They go out every day and they're dying. Something's eating them. Birds, they're some of the prettiest birds we have, red tanagers. The females are yellow. The males are a beautiful red, and they will eat like half their body weight in bees every day.
Yeah. Huh.
So, it's a circle of life, baby. And
that's right.
So to answer Chris's question, you're definitely occasionally going to get a bee leg or a wing or something in there. And that's why you got to also do that. Some people are into that kind of stuff. Like, I want the tequila with the worm still in the thing. I want to know this is real, man.
That's right. That's right. You definitely know it's real. You see a wing in there for sure, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm just like waiting for somebody to do that. You're going to trigger some people if you did that, but I'm surprised no one's done that. Like, this is legit, top shelf, $100 a jar. It's got a queen there right in the bottom, and it's real. Goodness.
Yeah, Sam asked actually just a little bit earlier too. Do bees have a specific distance they won't travel away from their home hive? Like, how far do they go?
That's a great question. So bees can travel up to like 5 miles or so if they want to.
Wow.
But so bees are programmed with, it's a great program. They're really all about profit for the colony. And maybe that some people don't like that term because it's a human term, but that's the way they think. They're honey bees. They produce way more of everything than what they need. Bees are all about efficiency, and they know exactly how much food they have in the hive. They know exactly how far something is from the hive. And they also know how much sugar content and benefits there are to a nectar off of this plant versus this one. So when yeah, exactly. And it won't hurt. It's probably healthy. Who knows?
Exactly.
It might be a cancer-saving drug. We have no clue.
That's right.
But I'm not going to find out either. So we those bees will go out of the morning. They'll send out scouts, and they'll go to maybe some clover over here. They'll go to tulip poplar over here, and they're going to dedicate the workforce for that early initial flight period towards whatever is closest, because when the bees go out, they have to fill up their honey crop. So they have two tanks. One is their stomach, so it's just a digestive tract and all that kind of stuff. And then you have the honey crop, which only thing it does is hold nectar, and it also imparts an enzyme into the nectar, invertase. And scientists discovered that many, many years ago. And that's where we got high fructose corn syrup and all these other syrups. How we invert those syrups into those sugars into a thick liquid is a mimic of invertase. So if you can go online and find enzymes to do just that. But those bees go out and they test all these plants out, and whatever is the sweetest, they're going to go after first because it takes less work to dehydrate that down. And since they have, if it's and also whatever's closest, so if it's 100 yards from the hive, they're able to communicate that to the bees, and those bees will only fill up enough honey to get to that point. Once the bees run out of what's in their tank, they cannot fly anymore. And so the bees have to be extremely accurate with this information. So if there's something really good half a mile away, those bees have to be accurate, and they're really, really darn good at it. And that way it's most profitable because, yeah, they could fill the tank all the way up and always have enough to make the trip, but then they wouldn't be able to profit as much off of the return trip.
Yeah.
Because they're hauling so much of the same stuff that they brought from the hive. So it's all about sugar content and proximity. So when bees are making honey for beekeepers to pull off, most of the time they're not going very far. I would say 3/4 of a mile tops during the honey flow season. That maybe they'll go a little further than that if it's a slim time of the honey flow. But most of the time, when it's a heavy honey flow, you can have a bunch of bees in one location during that period, and they're staying close to the hives. It's very efficient. But so that they're not going to go very far from the hive unless they're desperate, though. So just because they can, they definitely won't. They stay as close as they can.
Yeah, and the importance of everything for themselves individually and then for the hive and all of that is all a part of what their process and what they're doing in that sort of situation. Like I said, gauging their gas tank, basically. Let's see here. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here real quick. One we got earlier in the show with our previous guest, and he asked, could you blind taste test the different flavors and tell them apart of honey? And then Gingerfoot Gardener asked just a little bit ago too, can you talk more about the spicy honey? Is it because they're getting the spiciness from peppers? And I'm just curious.
So great questions. Let's take the pepper one. That is produced in Turkey, and it's extremely expensive and rare. And the plant isn't related to peppers at all, as far as I'm aware. And it is supposed to be really medicinal, but it's on this, I think it's a Scoville scale or whatever that's called for the peppers. Right. It's up on that. And
wow,
it's just something that the plants secrete with the nectar. And some of you have probably seen the stuff on YouTube or on TV about mad honey. And there are some honeys in, like, I can't remember where it's from, so I'm not going to even say, but it's like a rainforest or whatever. And it is like a hallucinogen, and you can get crazy on that stuff. And so it really is just what the plants are imparting into this. There's very few honeys out there that are like that. There is one here in the United States, rhododendron honey, and it is toxic, but the bees don't find that plant very profitable. It's very rare for them to produce honey off of that at all. And so you just never hear cases of that because the bees aren't doing it, and beekeepers don't put their bees close to that. But yeah, there's a few odds and ends in the industry. You have white honeys.
Wow.
And
yeah.
So Hawaii is really good at producing that. It comes off the Kiave plant in the desert of the Big Island. And who knew that Hawaii had deserts? Apparently, they got a lot of different climates over there. So as far as can we, as beekeepers, detect certain flavors of honey? If you're really skilled, you can do some of them, but there's so many varieties, and a lot of it is like, okay, this is sourwood honey right here.
Yeah.
This is produced by my friend in North Carolina, and sourwood honey has to grow at a certain elevation, and many years beekeepers don't find a lot of success with it because plants are really finicky. How much water did we get the year before? What are the temperatures? And so plants can be finicky, and some of them don't produce every year too. It's like every other year or every 3 years we're going to have a bumper crop. So
Mm.
we, and then there's also the mixing of honey. So sometimes, especially during the main honey flow, there's several different varieties coming at the same time or over a very close proximity. So it's very, very difficult to pull off one type of honey unless you're putting them on an area like if it's alfalfa and there's just thousands of acres of alfalfa all around you. Okay. You're probably 85, 90% pure alfalfa, canola, but most of the honeys out there, black locust, blackberry, it's very difficult to get it pure. So I don't even try, to be honest. I just mix my own. But this sourwood blooms typically when nothing else is blooming. So if the beekeeper takes all of the honey off the bees beforehand and then gives them empty combs, anything that he produces by and large is sourwood during that period because nothing else typically is blooming. So sourwood has a distinct flavor, and there are some honeys that they just kind of taste similar, especially in similar regions. So there are
You got
some
to be
honeys
a
that are,
real connoisseur, like those
oh,
wine tasters who can just find that little hint of whatever in there somehow.
notes of peach and
Yeah,
blackberry,
exactly.
all that stuff. We need to do that
Yeah.
with beekeeping. We really do. But no, it's very difficult. And
Yeah.
we have a honey show at our conference. We had like 1,200 entries, and you just see this giant wall of honey. And
Yeah.
it starts with the light section that is almost water white. It's extremely clear. That's hard to get. And then we'll have some you can read through it, yellow honey. And then you have a little bit more darker golden honeys. And then it gets to browns and red ambers, and then some green hues. And then we'll have some purples. That's very hard to get. The green and purples
Wow.
are very rare. And then you'll get motor oil black. And typically, the darker the honey, the more mineral content they have, unless it's old. All honey, even at room temperature, degrades to a degree. That doesn't mean that it's unhealthy for you, but certain enzymes and stuff do break down. And as they break down, the honey gets darker. So all honey will eventually get dark colored more by the year. And some do that quicker than others. So the world of honey is literally as diverse as plants producing nectar. It's wild.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And you're talking, so move on here just a little bit before we get you going, because I did want to kind of talk about some of these. So Tennessee's Bees is your business, your company that you and your wife run, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then also too, because I wanted to get to this actually, because I thought this was great. You are the founder of the North American Honey Bee Expo. And I see that big sign you got there behind you and all that. You want to tell us a little bit more about how that came to be? No pun intended. It's amazing how they pop up so easily like that.
Only beekeepers live the sweet life. So we have an endless supply of those, absolutely. But as far as the North American Honeybee Expo, I started my YouTube channel about 5 to 6 years ago, and I didn't think it was going to take off. It was my wife's idea. She's like, Kamon, you need to do this. There was a couple people on YouTube, but there wasn't a lot, and we really needed some education for this region. And she's like, I think you could be successful. I'm thankful that my wife believes in me more than I did at the time, because it took her about 2 years to convince me to start YouTube. And so we started that within the first year. We did pretty well. I think we had about 6,000 subscribers, and I was shocked, just absolutely shocked. And I told my wife I'd get her a steak dinner if we could get even 1,000 in the first year. And so she's like, do I get my 6 steak dinners? I'm expecting 6.
6,000 is one for each 1,000.
That's right. I'm like, wait a minute. But all jokes
that was
aside,
the thing. I was like, okay, he's got this North American Bee Expo. So I go and look at that, and I see some of your pictures, and I'm like, wow, this is a really great event. It's really going on there.
It's a lot of fun. And so from the YouTube, several of these people have become my friends, but they supported me in my early awkward years of YouTube, and I'm just less awkward now, maybe. And so as that grew, we had people like, Kamon, why don't you do like some classes or a meet and greet? And then my wife was kind of like, maybe we should do something like that. I'm like, well, maybe so. And we eventually did. And our first one was 200 people, and the next one was 800, then 2,000. And then last year was 3,200 with vendors included.
Wow.
So this year is shaping up to be at least that big. And so it's not all about the size, though. Our goal is to really just be useful to the industry. We're not interested in being on YouTube or being on or having a conference unless we are actually useful to people. And so we take this very seriously, and it costs money to be able to go to the expo and time. So we have the best offerings in the bee industry and in perhaps the world. We have discounts on everything from supplements to bee equipment, bee suits,
Yeah.
hive tools, you name it. And we bring in last year we had about 32 semi loads of product at our show, and most of it sells.
Wow.
And we have extractors for a brand new beekeeper with a hand crank, like I started off with my first year. And then we have some systems that can do, dozens of barrels of honey a day. And so we have educators come in, and we bring them in from the Yukon and Europe. And of course, here in the United States, we want to provide a full perspective of hard wintering areas of beekeeping, southern beekeeping, the challenges of each place. We just want to be useful. And the honey show really celebrates not only just liquid honey, but we have flavored creamed honey categories. Husband and wife brought some cotton candy honey. I didn't even know until this year you could turn honey into cotton candy, and you could taste the honey. I mean, it tasted like honey, cotton candy. It was, and so some people are like, well, you lose some of the health benefits. I'm like, yeah, but
it's cotton candy.
It's cotton candy, and it's really a gateway.
And you're at a fair,
young
basically.
people.
So
Right.
come on, let's do it.
Right. And so flavored honeys, I'm a bigger fan of like the more natural ones. Here's some from my buddy in Kentucky who does, this is vanilla bean. So it's creamed honey with vanilla
wow.
bean flecks in it. It is absolutely delicious. And, so there's so many different ways to consume honey. And so the honey show shows the beeswax. There's people who paint with beeswax. There's just all kinds of things. And we also have the biggest honey swap, as far as we know, in the world. And so all the beekeepers that come to this show can bring, I think it's a max of 30 or 40 jars. And you bring them to a nonprofit that helps us at the expo, and we will swap them for you and try to mix them with as many varieties as possible. And you're allowed to swap, of course, yourself. So you can get fireweed honey from Alaska. You can get canola honey from Canada. You can get Hawaiian honey. So we really want this to be, oh, there we go. I really want this to be the experience for beekeepers, and it to be fun and interactive. And it definitely is a lot of fun, a lot of neat personalities there, and it's a blast.
Yeah. I just got back this last week from our gardening exposition down in Southern California, the National Heirloom Exposition, and one of the most popular parts of this event is the seed swap.
Sure.
And, what I mean? Lines out the door and wrapping around, and people all over bringing their seeds and swapping them, or just even getting some seeds just to get some free seeds from other people and all of that. And it's so great to see that kind of connection and community and people coming together to, swap those out and trade those out. But man, a honey swap, I mean, this probably literally got to be probably one of the more popular things of your expo as well.
It really is. And it's the little things. We have, like I said, great speakers. The trade show is huge, but beekeepers love bees. I mean, there's Richard. He's been one of our speakers in the past and a very good friend. He has a really good YouTube channel as well on beekeeping. He speaks British, so we have to kind of poke the fun at him a little. Remind him who won the Revolutionary War and a few other odds and ends. But Richard and I get along very, very great. And so, Richard and guys like that, and there's just several ladies and personalities, they bring all these skills. It's about the networking, and it's about creating a place for people just to enjoy. You don't have to go crazy and spend all this. You got to get these apps and all these funky things that we have. Gardeners like to talk about gardens and they like to swap seeds, and beekeepers like to swap honey and they like to talk about bees. Create an environment where the people can enjoy each other's company and get excited together, and you've got a winning solution. It's a lot of times we overcomplicate these things. People just want to talk about their passions, and let's not get in the way of that.
Yeah. Again, to find just the same sort of situation, it's so wonderful to be able to take the time for, myself as a really passionate gardener, to go down to our exposition down in Southern California there, be a part of the community, get to see everybody in person as we're, growing throughout the year and all of that. And now that I'm got to go see some of my first hives yesterday. I got to be around some of my first bees, put on my first bee suit yesterday. Man, I'm totally excited. I mean, literally about this, and I want to learn more. I want to do more. And literally, I got to get out to this bee expo and take a part of all of that as well, too, as I move down the road and learn a little bit more about
Absolutely.
beekeeping. And real quick here, before we do let you go or anything like that, I do want to give you a chance to let everybody know just maybe a little bit about more about yourself, your channel, Tennessee Bees, the North American Honey Bee Expo, and also too, and I didn't ask you here, you also have what's called the Next Gen Bee program.
Yes, and so that goes in tandem with our silent auction at the North American Honey Bee Expo, and so we typically raise around $18,000. Companies donate bee products, and a lot of individuals do. I mean, we have several cool people from around the industry who, some of them are retirees and they're really good at woodworking or quilting or whatever it is, and they'll bring stuff for the silent auction. All the money that is generated from that goes to the Next Gen Bee program, and we pay for like $300 towards their hotel. We give them and their guardian free passes. Last year they got bee suits, they get merchandise and free courses. We'll have some special courses for these guys and girls between the ages of 12 and 20. And we're really looking with that program to help these young men and women, because a lot of times they feel like they're kind of out on an island. I remember that feeling when you're 14, 15, 16, you're the weird kid. Everyone's playing video games and you're into heirloom seeds and into beekeeping.
That's right.
And so I had a ton of friends, but all of them were old enough to be my grandpa, pretty much, or my grandmother. And that was great. I think I credit a lot of my success to those relationships because those people are a lot smarter than 14 and 15-year-olds. So you can learn a lot from these older folks. But sometimes you still feel like you're alone there and you're an odd duck. So allowing these kids to come to the expo on this silent auction money gets them exposed to some of the legends in the industry. They get to see the excitement of all the products and they get to learn about that. We give them some classes, and it's not just about here's how to keep bees. Here's also how to have some healthy perspective on keeping bees. And it's the same way with chickens or with gardening, same with bees. If you're not losing bees, you're not keeping bees. And it's part of the
I say the
process.
same thing about gardening. If you're not killing plants, you're not gardening either.
Yeah, seriously. And nature's that way too. Most things don't survive. And it's part of the selection process. But as humans, we can understand that. We can do a few extra things to help the percentages go in our favor. And so in nature, typically a swarm, only 1 out of 6 swarms make it to their next year. But in a good bee operation, if you have one hive and you know how to split that hive, you could turn that into 3 in a year. And if you lose one of those, well, now you've doubled your hives. And that's pretty much how we run our operation. We lose about 30% of our hives a year throughout the year, but I can triple my operation. And so bees during the spring months and when they're healthy, they can really grow quickly and do quite well. So understanding that for the young people is really important, because sometimes when you're 16 and you lose both of your hives or one of your hives, you take it really hard and you don't get back into it. So we just want to give them a healthy perspective. But heck, some of these kids, though, I mean, goodness, they're raising queens. Some of them are running a couple hundred hives. Some of them are quite accomplished already. So I don't want to act like they don't know what they're doing. Some of them are I, if I was 15 going up against them, they would kick my butt.
Right, right. Yeah, yesterday when I met with Leslie from the Southern Oregon Bee Association, she brought her young daughter with her too, maybe 7 years old or so, and she was just having fun. She had like a little drone on her hand and all of that, showing me this sort of stuff. She was just really into it, and I was just, man, it's so great to see young kids to be so fascinated with things like that, especially coming from the perspective I have. I mean, at that age, I was running scared from anything like that. I would have. All right, let's see here. Actually, I did have one last question. I think it's kind of a good question here, real quick. Serena did jump in and asked about this as we are in fall, or heading to fall and towards winter. What do you do to get your bees ready for winter?
That's great. So a lot of the work, bees are all about momentum, and it's difficult when you've lost the momentum to gain it back. And so really prepping for winter starts after the honey flow. And everyone's location is different. When I took my bees up to Wisconsin, their flow ends like August. They have theirs doesn't really start until about June either. In Tennessee, my flow's almost done by June. So when that flows over here, if I'm just going to keep my bees in my backyard here in Tennessee, I'm just trying to maintain and check these colonies and ensure they're healthy. So winter really prep starts after the flow is over. So it depends on kind of your location and timing, but definitely by August, I'm a big believer in controlling varroa mites, the number one problem that kills honeybees. And there are several natural methods to doing this. There are some bees that are able to resist mites to a degree. I have tested a lot. I've yet to find one that actually can be purchased and uniformly control mites on their own. Some people will not like that statement, but I don't like having to treat for mites. I don't like having to use thiamol or natural acids to control them. It's a lot of work and expense. But I can tell you this, if I control varroa mites and they don't affect my bees, and I'm going into August with a very clean colony with a good queen, and as long as they have plenty of food, I'm going to overwinter 90% of the time. It's really more than that. It's, there's 3 keys that we teach: great queens, dead mites, and good nutrition. And you got to have all 3 of those things at all times to be successful in this industry. And so August is really when things start shifting down. The bees are hitting the fall flow, the goldenrod, the wing stem, the aster, a few other odds and ends, depends on where you live. And hopefully it's not like this year where we're like 10 inches short on rain. Right. And so the plants don't perform near as good. What little pollens and nectars they do produce aren't as nutritious. And so that's where sometimes we supplemental feed our bees, because we want that momentum to be as high as possible, building up that winter cluster. Because once they decelerate down around the first frost to getting rid of the old bees and just having winter bees, that's where a lot of beekeepers go, whoa, I thought this hive was like 20 frames strong. Well, it was in September, but 12 of those frames or more were old bees. And then there wasn't good nutrition. So now you're left with a 3-frame cluster going into winter. And maybe if you're in southern Louisiana, you can get through your winter with 3 frames of bees. You're not in Wisconsin, that's for sure. So it really just depends on location. And always, I'm a big believer in babying our stuff. We have a responsibility to do our best. And whether it's taking care of horses or cows, all you have to do is look at wild cattle, look at wild horses, look how long they survive versus a well taken care of horse in a stable. And it'll show you how much human care giving your creatures optimal opportunities to express their full genetics towards immune reactions towards stress. They live longer, and there's no difference with bees too. The natural stuff is best, but when there's not natural, a little bit of sugar syrup and a little bit of pollen substitute can really help them out. It's kind of like my kids. I want to give them, and they're really good at eating radishes and turnips and carrots and all that stuff. But if I can tell you right now, if we had none of that and all we had was hot dogs and buns and ketchup, That's not what I like to feed my kids, but you can bet I'm feeding my kids hot dogs and
Yeah.
vine. That's the way I look at feeding bees is
When they
like,
need to
okay,
eat, you got to go, and there isn't the resources you need. You got to go with what you got. And some
you
people
gotta
are
go
just
with what you
stuck
got.
in that sort of situation, anyways. And that's just kind of a part of, I guess, a part of life in in sense, And
Yes.
dang, Cayman, I'm telling you what, man, this has just been amazing. Sitting here talking with you this last hour and just getting to learn I mean, my head is so full of stuff. I'm gonna just, but I could sit here and talk to you for a whole another hour on on so many more questions and so many things to do that. So definitely have to have you back again sometime to talk more about bees down the road. But again, thank you so much, really, for spending your time with us today. And again, too, on the last minute, changing the day from Sunday to today. I would really, really appreciate that. And it's been really, really well worth the time to be able to hang out here with you and talk about all of the bees you got going, the Bee Expo, the Next Gen Bee program. You're doing so many amazing, awesome things in the beekeeping world, man. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. You all take care. Keep up the gardening. We appreciate you planting stuff to feed our bees.
That's right. That's right. We're working together here, man. Excellent,
care.
Cayman. Thank you again so much. And we'll hopefully get to see you again soon. All right, man. I'm telling you, what a great, great first day of our beekeeping weekend. And how fortunate are we to be able to have such great guests today to talk all about this. Just again, this fascinating subject. I'm just getting into it, just digging into this whole thing myself. And it's just so amazing. Again, like I said, I got to go to the Southern Oregon Bee Association yesterday and get to see my first hives. I got to look in there and see all these bees flying all around me. And again, luckily, I got into my first bee suit to have them all around me like that. But it was probably one of those cooler, more really just interesting things that I've gotten to do this year so far. And I'm so glad that I had that opportunity because it's just made this conversation just even more fascinating for me today. So really just an awesome conversation. So we definitely got to thank Jonathan Hargus, the Hive Doctor, from our front segment today. And again, 2 links down below to these guys, Kamon Reynolds, Tennessee Bees. We've got a link to his channel as well down below. Jay has put in links as well in our chat. Definitely go and check out some of their videos and subscribe to their channels for us, and go and just leave them a comment. Just go do this as a favor and go to these guys, go jump on one of their recent videos or something and just leave them a comment and say, hey, thank you so much for all of that great conversation you had here at the Let's Get Growing show. Let them know that you saw them here. That would just be really, really awesome. Show them some support as well for their time that they spent here today with us to, like I said, just a ton of great information. We've got to have Kamon back on again too. He's just, just such a knowledgeable person about this sort of stuff. So, I had 100 more questions myself I could have gotten into when it comes down to it. So, and again, also too, thank you to all of you as well too for spending your time on this Saturday to hang out with us and talk all about bees with our great guests today. And again, to so many awesome folks here in our chat today. Adam, thank you so much as well. And what a great topic for this weekend. I know, it's so awesome. And again, we've been wanting to do more of these types of weekends, similar to what we did with hot peppers or towards the beginning of our gardening season. I've got another great weekend coming up as well too here in a few weeks. And it just kind of tease a little bit. I ain't going to say who we got yet, but we're going to talk about giants. So we'll have a weekend on giants. We're going to talk a little bit more also again too here coming up in a couple of Sundays as well. We'll do a roundtable to talk a little bit more about pollinators in general, native bees as well, and some of those other things. Is going to be great conversation to kind of continue this sort of conversation we've started here this weekend. So again, lots of great shows. Yeah, Jay says here in the comments, we're back tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, for more excellent bee content. That's 11 a.m. Pacific time as well, too. So you'll want to join with us for tomorrow's show, as we will have with us. Let me get this here. We've got joining with us. Oh, I got to get on there. Larissa Kozak from Beekeeping Made Simple is going to be joining with us tomorrow. And I'll just say, I know we had originally planned for a roundtable with Larissa and Kamon, but our featured guest kind of backed out today last minute, so we were kind of scrambling to get some things done, and so that's why I was kind of thinking Kamon earlier too, just a little bit more for joining with us kind of last minute. He switched from Sunday to be here with us today to talk about everything. So we're going to spend our day tomorrow talking with Larissa from Beekeeping Made Simple and dig more into this. So again, too, if there's some questions or any sort of things that you kind of thought of about bees and beekeeping, as we were talking to Jonathan and Kamon today, definitely come and join with us tomorrow for our Sunday edition of the show when we talk to Larissa. And also too, like I said, I'm gonna be working on it to get that little segment for our In the Garden. We're gonna give Mark a week off from the In the Garden tomorrow's for the segment. I'm going to show you our clips that we got from our visit with the Southern Oregon Bee Association. So I'm really looking forward to that as well too. And also, you know, we got shows coming up this next weekend. We got lots of great guests lined up in the next coming weeks, but we got to have one of our good friends, our original guest, the very first guest that we had on the Let's Get Growing show, and someone I got to catch up with and always look forward to catching up with at the National Heirloom Exposition this last week. We've got joining with us next Saturday on the show, Wendy Fan from Wendyland. And you won't want to miss this conversation and interview with Wendy. Wendy is just a plethora of knowledge, and literally one of, you know, there's a couple of gardens I've gotten to visit and to go visit people who grow and have their gardens, but Wendy is literally a superstar when it comes to small space gardening and also growing things that you wouldn't necessarily know about. And she grows a lot of really kind of rare plants and edible food and all of that in her garden. So we're going to ask her all about that as well too. We have, for our Sunday edition this next week, we're going to welcome back to the show with his co-host from his show, the the Garden Party podcast. We're going to have joining with us Destin Noakes from the Texas Garden Guy, and his co-host Phil from Phil's Figs next week, to have a nice fun garden roundtable to talk with these great hosts of their own show as well too. So you'll want to join with us next Sunday for that all for those great conversations too. And yeah, lots and lots of things going on. We got some great guests and lots more coming up too as we keep moving on into the fall season. That's what what is it? Is it today like the first day of fall? It was either today or yesterday, I believe. So our seasons are moving along quickly. So it'll be winter before we know it. And again too, so I want to thank you all so much again for all of your time here joining with me. And if you can too, before we leave here today, click that like button, hit the thumbs up, and also if you haven't yet already, or you're just joining the program today and seeing what we're all about, definitely click that subscribe button, hit the bell notification too, so you'll be notified of the upcoming videos and live streams on our show. And definitely share with all of your friends and let them know about the Let's Get Growing show here on the Urban Gardener channel, live on YouTube every Saturday and Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And definitely follow all of our links down below in the description to all of our guests and our sponsors, as well as there's a link down below too for our Let's Get Growing group on Facebook, and this is a great place for you to continue the conversation here and as well share some of your gardens and garden experiences in our group. It's a great place too. Like I always say, it's a great opportunity for all of you to be able to share your growing and gardening experiences with me so that I can see what you all got growing on as well too. So again, thank you all so much for joining with us here today. And I definitely look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow on tomorrow's show. So again, we'll see all of you then.